Hi, welcome to the session. Today we're going to be looking at Dua Lipa's IDGAF and how to recreate that in Logic Pro X. IDGAF is a great pop song that rides on one single riff throughout the song, yet keeps it interesting. So let's have a look. So this is the project for IDGAF by Dua Lipa, and this is the cold vocal track up here. And let's have a listen to the track.
You call me all friendly, telling me how much you miss me. Cause if you think I was born yesterday, you have got me wrong. So I cut you off, I don't need your love, I'll tell you why. You say you're sorry, but it's too late now. Well boy, I don't give a fuck.
So let's get to it. Now, the first bit, which is the guitar bit, it's played by a live guitar in the recording, but we used MIDI guitars here and try to emulate the sound of that guitar. Now, instead of just one track, what you can do if you want more expressiveness in your track is to use multiple tracks for different parts. So we have, under guitars, electric guitars, muted electric guitar. We got the muted bits which sound like this. Yeah, it looks like that. Pretty straightforward pattern. That's the main pattern. And if you notice, we took off the high end because that suits the sound more. It's more of that mellow sound. And if we turn it off, it's going to sound like this. And let's turn off the space designer as well. Right? And to take off all the high end, to make it more mellow, more muted and more mellow. And the space designer, what we put in place is a really small one, which an indoor space 0.2 second closet. And it's fairly wet. And it's to give the sense of sort of like recorded in sort of a room kind of sound. And also it's sent to a bus, and in this case it's bus 1. And space designer, medium space halls, small guitar hall, 100% wet because it's a send. Now, it's a really tiny amount of send, but it makes a difference. Have a listen. I'm going to turn it off. So just that little bit of space. Now, this guitar plug is kind of like muted, but there are some parts in the real guitar playing that's actually a bit more sustained. And for that, we use another Logic instrument called, under guitars, electric guitar harmonics. Now these are the sustain bits, so they sound like that. Now, this one is also EQ'd off. The top end is just rolled off with a little bit more presence at the low mids. And together, they sound like this. Starting to sound a bit more realistic. And this riff carries out throughout the song, so it's really important to get it right. Now, I did the same thing where I put the 0.2 second closet on top of this sustain guitar just to give it the same sense of space in the plucked guitar. But I tried something new as well. I put a direction mixer and I wanted to spread it out a little bit. So I put this kind of spread on, and here's just a very subtle thing. Without it, it's really centered, very present, and I sort of spread it out a bit. Yeah, it's not as forward. And there's also the third thing, which is just a bit of guitar noise. And what I use to sort of like, you know, when your fingers sort of hit the strings, that little chick kind of sound, I used a electric guitar muted notes. And normally it doesn't sound like that, but what I did was I pulled the sustain down right to 0 and just a little bit of decay, so you get a little bit of like a click. I was like, oh, that sounds kind of like fingers of hitting the guitar string. So I put that in, put a little compressor in, and vintage opto, just a fairly medium ratio and a really high makeup because it's really soft. And send it to the same reverb as well, just to get all three in the same space. So here's how it sounds. I think it's fairly convincing. So, and it's fairly organic. I think what we want to get is not just being close to the source material, but to get it sounding real and to sounding good. And that's what's most important when we produce stuff. Now, we have a little snap on top of it. It's really straightforward. Under drums and percussion, single instruments, there's snaps. And a straightforward, quiet little snap. Very dry. And that's kind of it. So that's the intro.
You call.
That's pretty straightforward. Now, it goes on the same right until we hit the part where the nice little snarey bits come in. So here is that snare, and it looks like that. So, you know, it's gonna sound a little bit machine gunny. You need to muck around with the velocities a little bit, but that's as good as we can make it for this one. So this snare track, it's a SoCal kit, which looks like this, right? We picked SoCal 3. I upped the gain a little bit, mucked around with this a bit. I pitched the tune really high up, right to the max, and it's still not tuned like high up because that drum is a really different kind of drum. But I think we got the general vibe of it. And EQ'd the heck out of the low end, so it's just this high end. See, here's how it sounds without the EQ. Yeah. And here's with the EQ. Yep. So it's got this really like thin kind of sound, and just to get it really like punchy, I love to use the preset Fat Life drums and then muck from there. And this is the kind of sound we got, punchy and high. Same reverb going to bus 1. And yeah, and then I have a SoCal kit, and this one's sort of that boom. Pretty simple, compressor as well. Same thing, Fat Life drums. And the drum kit is also a SoCal kit, and it's just playing this. So you can see the snare here. It used to be one kit, and I felt like I needed to treat them differently because this kit has been EQ'd. So sometimes what you need to do is split your kits into different tracks and then EQ them differently. So in this case, it's kind of like that. Now, that's pretty okay, but if you want that boom, you probably need to layer more stuff. And in this case, I'll lay it an orchestral percussion orchestral kit. And we got a little nice little like boom here. Yeah. And you get this as well. So that one's pretty straightforward. We send it to a different bus because it needs to be a little bit bigger, and we send it to a sort of nice hall, and that's how it sounds. Yeah, a little bit of a hall sound. And I felt like it's not big enough. It's okay, not big enough. We need a bit of a lower end kind of sound. So I found under World African kit, it was this nice little lowish thud. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So I compressed it with good old Fat Life drums again. A little bit of a reverb to the bass as well. And now you get this combination. And together with the drums, sounding pretty good. I think we're like 99% there. I felt like just needed a little bit more. And so I found under World European Folk Kit with same reverb, this kind of flux of like a bit more high end, like a pseudo kind of sound. And you know, all these work together in concert to give you that big sound. You know, you don't really hear so many different kinds of drums. You just hear like sort of big bunch of drums. And I think they complement each other really, really well. So we have another set of claps and steps performance here, because this ones are claps. And yep, you can see the claps here, and as you can see, there's layered claps on top of each other. They're also compressed with fat light drums, and I EQ'd all the low end out because in this case it felt like it just needed that clappy high end sound. Yeah, and if you notice, I sent it to a different bus now. Now in this case, I sent it to a snare chamber because I didn't want that sort of holly sound for the snare.
I don't need your love.
Yeah, it's not so ambient kind of claps, not like everybody's in the hall clapping, although this one is really sort of like ambient. So you don't really have to have everything going to the same kind of reverb. You can mix them about, and this is how it sounds. Yeah, and it kind of works. And also, something I need to point out to you guys is that in this case, I just copied this SoCal Kid snare thing. I used this, copy the track, you know, new track with duplicate settings, and I got this track. And I treated it slightly differently. You can see the levels here. This is a 1.6 and this is a 3.6. So, you know, you don't have to automate tracks. I find this personally an easier and neater way to go about leveling your tracks. Just copy them. You can have, I mean, now in the digital domain, computers are so powerful. You can have, you know, 5 to 6 tracks or maybe even 10 tracks of the same thing at different levels, slightly different treatments. Then you can sort of like place them where you want. And that's kind of how I do a lot of these days. Now, so that's the percussion bit.
Since we said goodbye, I cut you off.
Right? And this one is slightly softer then.
So you can
Because it's busier than the first bit, so I felt like it got in the way, needed to push it down a little bit. Now, let's get to the big section. The guitars, if you notice, they're the same things happening all throughout. And right before you get to the big section, you have I've placed two things. One is just a warp speed effect 11, which you can find in your Apple Loops section. Warp speed effect 11. Yeah, and I just placed it over here, and it sounds like this. And just cut it on beat 4. And I got a reverse cymbal. And just to show you how a reverse cymbal is done manually, because I don't think Logic has a good reverse cymbal in the loops, I just loaded up a rock kit under drums percussion, acoustic drum kits, rock kit. And I played a cymbal, and this is how it sounds. After I played the cymbal, I did a bounce in place. And once you bounce in place, let's just pretend. You get this track, new track, mute, bypass effect plugins. You get, oops, it's not what I want to do. Let's undo that. Yep. So you get this track, and you get it forward. So what I did was you double click on it, you go to File, and then you go Functions and Reverse. And once you reverse that, you get this, a reverse cymbal. And then you can just crop it where you want. It's a slightly longer one, but I just cropped it there. So together, they sound like this. Yeah, and that leads up to the chorus. So it goes...
tell you why. You say
leads up to that giant snare. So talking about the snares, I was trying really hard to get the right snare for this. It's quite a tough job to match the one in the song because it's so nice and so fat. So I use a big beat remix kit, and I use a snare from there, and it's actually layered. Two of the big beat snares, and yeah, that's how they sound by themselves. There's a compressor going on. You can see my favorite. Bites really hard, really fast. And I send it to two buses. One is to bus 1, which is that nice big space. Right? And, sorry, the small guitar hall. And bus 3, which is the... Aha! This is the fun one. So, I wanted something that was like gated. Because it sounded big without having too much of a tail. So I think this is sort of perfect for a gated reverb. And let's take it out and hear how it sounds. It's got this really like short, sort of like quick decay. And if you have this, it just makes it fatter and, Yeah, so play around with gated reverbs. This one's under medium, gated reverbs, gated chamber. And when you play around with gated reverbs, you can get quite a lot of like fat, interesting sounds. Now in this case, let me turn this gated reverb off. I paired it with another snare from the Headbanger kit, which is under Drums and Percussions, Acoustic Drum Kits, Headbanger kit. Now, here's how it sounds. Just for that snap, right? And if I turn on the gated reverb, woo! Nice and fat. Now, if you play them together... Ooh, yes, that's a nice fat reverb. Now, let's go to the kicks now. And I like to go to Logic's sort of single drums. You go to Drums and Percussion, single drums, kicks. And under there, you have acoustic kicks, electronic kicks, layer kicks, and, there's a bunch of them. Normally, I get to find what I want, or at least the basics of what I want. And this one is pretty straightforward. Yeah. And I EQ'd a bit of the low end out because I found it was a bit too boomy in the sense of layering these kicks. I do layer 3 layers of kicks. You gotta be a little bit careful when you layer kicks because they can sound a little bit messy. I layered another kick from the single drums, kicks, acoustic kicks. So now there's an acoustic kick as well. And this one's sent to the gated reverb. Woo! Just to give it that big sound. And together... So there's no flamming, which is great. One's on the deeper lower side, one's supplying sort of the higher end of the kick. And then this one is really just, the punchiness, right? And the electronic kicks as well, C117. So you got to play, to get the true kick here, you play C1, right? That's where it is. This one's completely dry. And let's see how it sounds. And together with the snares. Woo! It's a pretty big drum kit. Now, I used this SoCal kit. It happened to be here, and I tried the hats on it. It sounded fine. So here's how the hats are. It's just a pretty simple pattern. So if you put it together, it sounds like this. And we added a bit more claps here. So I added sort of under the claps and snaps performance, I just treated it differently with a different sort of like level as well. And this one goes to bus 4, which is a snare chamber. Yeah, so it just makes the snare bigger. We doubled it. and everything else.
Say you're sorry, please do.
And then you have a little interesting sort of percussive thing going on here under Factory World South American Latin kit. And what you get is just a little sort of like tambourine shake.
Late now.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. And that was sent to bus 1, just to give it a sense of space. And that's everything. Now onto the bass. It's a pretty straightforward bass under sculpture. Under model bass, there's a mini vintage bass, and it's a sort of like really deep, really sustained bass. And it's just long sustained lines. Very subby. And that's kind of it.
Say you're sorry.
So yeah, and that is that section. The chorus, pretty straightforward. There's small little vocal sample things in the original track that I didn't recreate here because that's more from her voice as a sampled version. So I think I'll just leave it at that. Now for the second section, it's pretty much the same as the first section, except there's these additional kicks. The kicks are slightly different from the original. The verse, doesn't have kicks, only the second verse. So these kicks, this one's from the orchestral kit. It's the same big boom you get from the first section, with this new bricks kit. So under drums and percussion, electronic drum kits, bricks kit, with a little bit of, reverb to the gated chamber. See the difference if I take it out? With, it's just sort of like bigger, right? And not overwhelming because of the tail. It's being cut off because of the gate. So that's a beat here. And the next thing is pretty much the same, except that we added a tambourine, and this is something you can get from your Remix Tambourine 1. Oh, sorry, it's this one. So I picked the best section of it, and I actually cut it down a little bit so it's more right. Every 2 beats has an accent, and in the chorus, the next chorus, every beat has an accent. Yeah, not exactly the smoothest, but in the context it works fine. So it sounds like this.
Say you're sorry, it's too late now.
So that's most of it, except that in the second part of the chorus, in the second part of the second chorus, there's this new piano line. And this is I was just experimenting with other instruments. So under GarageBand, there's a sort of like a piano, an economy piano. I liked it because it sounded pretty crappy, and it's just like yeah, pretty straightforward kind of thing, and it sounds like that in context.
Get to me. I see you begging on your
And it's kind of what it needs, a crappy sounding poppy piano. And right at the very end, there's sort of like a flutish sort of line that goes sustain kind of line. I just use a preset on this, as in the channel preset, which I don't normally use, but thought I'd give it a try. Under woodwinds, flutes, and it's got its own buses, and it sounded fine, so I'll just let it be.
Get to me. I see you begging on your knees.
Yeah, works perfectly fine. Now, for the end sort of sustained bass, I would say maybe not sustained, sort of decayed bass. I just recreated the next track using a copy new track with duplicate settings. And in this track, I changed the envelope of the sculpture instrument. Just pulled sustain right down, and decay is probably at about 1 second, and it's just was one single note going here, and you have a little decay. Yep, because the rest is a sustained note. There's no real decay on this, and yeah, that's how the song ends. And there you have it. I hope you learned something useful today, like how to use gated reverbs to create huge sounds yet controlled. If you like, you can download the project at the link below, and if you like this video, please subscribe for more. See ya.